Hey, Rob.
Hey,
How's it going?
good. Like an amazingly pretty day here. So,
Nice. Thank you for copying the stuff in. I realized like, oh, I probably should have done that because Jason's not around anymore.
I assumed that was on me, and then I just
Oh.
totally forgot about it. So,
Oh, oops, I thought I opened the agenda.
yeah, I set up the doc yesterday, but I forgot to actually post links and everything.
Oh, thanks for doing that. I can definitely do it in future weeks. I apologize for not being on that.
Okay.
Do we know if Dan's coming?
I don't know, and I don't know if Kevin's coming either.
Okay. Cool. Um, is there, I obviously haven't put in an update yet. I don't think there's anything like super relevant dev-wise. I still haven't taught myself how to get into the database. That's on the list after some of these other projects. But yeah, nothing too big. Anything on yours that you want to highlight?
Nothing super special on my end. I feel bad because I'm behind on reviewing some stuff that Jonathan posted. And I have a call with Phil this afternoon to plan for a call with OpenRoad tomorrow. So I guess like if you have any thoughts about that, or if you want to join that call or whatever. My chief concern is trying to think through, like my worry is whether we can still effectively phrase what we're asking for in terms that make sense for OpenRoad based on the sort of like scope change for walk.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
My other twin worry is that whether that scope change was right at the end of the day, given like I just freak out every time that Wayback has problems. Wayback has been experiencing problems for the last 5 days now, so.
Yeah. Well, so if there were, is it 85K that we're applying for from OpenRoad?
I think it's 80, but I'm not
Okay.
sure. Something like that.
If there were 80K coming in, would that, like I'm totally remembering Brendan's, advice and what you've also said before of like, don't invest, 75K now for something that's going to cost you 250K next year and every year ongoing. But yeah, I do wonder if there's any, like, would the money coming in from that like change the potential scope of walk to something that might be like more amenable to what OpenRoad might be looking for?
I guess so. Like my struggle there is we have potential infrastructural costs we need to figure out how to cover, but that's not. We can't ask OpenRoad to pay for that. Like we could probably shift Packard funds around, and then OpenRoad would pay for the person or whatever. Because OpenRoad wants to. The whole thing is based around like we're not going to give you money for ongoing costs that you have failed to figure out how to pay for. We're giving you money for like you ran into an emergency that you need money to solve, and it is a thing.
Yeah.
And so I think also the original conception was before we rebudgeted everything was like, oh, that would be useful to pay for Rob. But now we sort of like rebudgeted stuff to figure out how to pay for me outside of that. So I don't know if this is like another opportunity to rebudget again if we got it, or if it's also in this zone of like, well, it could be a pot of money to pay for a person to work on stuff, but I don't know how or when we're going to find that person to do that stuff. Right? Because what we don't have is a pool of people who would just be like, oh, if I could get paid, I could put in more time, except for me, which we're already sort of solving. And the other people who are read in and have context and have done work on the stuff we would need in this space don't have malleable time. Right?
Yeah.
We can't like trade money to get more time.
Yeah.
So it's also in the zone of like, well, what would having that additional pot of money change at this point?
Right. Although, well, and I don't know the quality of work, like, but I know that Jason would be open in the future, like when his personal life calms down, to like come back on a like kind of project specific. And I don't know if that's something that would be of interest if he were like in a very specific like software development only role and didn't have time eaten by administrative stuff. And I know that Ray is wanting to re-engage. I don't know in what capacity, but he's expecting this. He's been in touch a few times, kind of checking in, and then also saying that like he's been hoping to re-engage, but he thinks he'll really have time this summer to, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to bring more people back in. My struggle with Ray is, I think part of the trouble we ran into when he was sort of project managing is that we felt like we needed somebody to fulfill that role because we felt like what we were seeing was more people like showing up on GitHub and stuff. And then all of that sort of disappeared as she started. And it felt like, at least within web monitoring, like there was not the stuff for him to do that we all thought there was. But I also don't know, like maybe if his perspective on it is really different. And the struggle where we are right now, I feel like is just need people who have the time to really get context and really participate in things, do development work. And like I love Ray, but that's not Ray. Like that's not his skill set.
Okay.
And
I wasn't sure what his core skill set was.
Just much more like organizational and project management.
Okay.
And then with Jason, like that would be something really interesting to talk about. I also, I guess, struggle a little bit with how the past month has gone, which feels like the time to demonstrate how we can get work done when the questions of like, oh, I'm distracted by all these other things that I thought I needed to do, and we just miscommunicated about who should be focusing on what, it was gone. Yeah. Like we shouldn't have had those distractions during the past month, and I don't feel like from a like get development work done perspective that actually wound up changing a whole lot. But I also know he has all the like family related stuff going on right now. And so I don't know to what degree, like that just took over all the things that we like, we freed up by like removing some of the administrative burden, was then taken up by that. So I feel like I feel like the entire tenure of that engagement has been very hard for me to judge on like, could this be a good thing to re-engage on in a more focused capacity?
Yeah, agreed.
So
yeah. Well,
So I'm not saying like no, but I'm also saying like those seem less clear cut to me.
totally, totally. I think we should still go for the open road because I think that like we could, we found seemingly quality folks. Like every time we've put out an advertisement, job advertisement. So I think that, and of course, like hiring is a lot of work, and we've, I think, thought of like some ways to streamline that. Thank God. Um, but I think, yeah, just because we don't have a great fit of somebody who's already engaged, I think it could still really work out. Like, I feel like Kelsey has been really helpful for the archiving team.
Oh, Kelsey's been amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah. So like as far as like new people coming in and like really being able to get contacts and move, I think it's possible. But yeah, as far as the scope shift of walk, and if that is would still be considered like an emergency kind of reroute. Good question.
Yeah, because like that shift is now it's fulfilling a need that we, as time goes on, is a more acute lack, and it's important to get it started sooner rather than later because all of this stuff is about recording things, and once time has passed, you have missed the opportunity to record. So it is sort of an emergency in that respect, but it's not like its scope is no longer fixing the gaping hole that we have that has formed. It's the gaping hole that we've always had, as opposed to like a new, fresh wound.
Yeah. It's also something that we sort of, I think it also could be swung a little bit. Like we sort of thought that we would have had that capacity in Internet Archive, and then learned that that's not what they're suited to do at all. And like, so I think it could be swung in that way as well. Of like, there are many things we were hoping to accomplish using Internet Archive. It's been much more challenging. Like they're great, and it's been much more challenging on these multiple fronts. What we have the capacity to do is address this one right now, or something like that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's a good framing for it.
I do wonder how to like, what would be a better like alternative for primary data? Like, not that we would need to do that ourselves, but like, it sure seems like a hole.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like at this point, from people we've talked to and projects we've looked at and everything else, like there's not going to be a better third-party source of data. I think Versionista has some competitors, and I haven't looked deeply at those because I feel like the trade-offs are going to be similar. So using one of their competing services is not really going to change the game for us. And of the ones that I know about, they're the one that is most oriented towards the sort of thing we're trying to do, which is like larger scale, like look at lots of stuff, as opposed to tooling that works better when you're like monitoring 10 things as opposed to 10,000 things. But there's no other service that fits what we need or want to do other than Internet Archive or something structured like it. And all the other things structured like it are sort of, they're like other libraries, like the British Library sort of trying to run its own version of the Internet Archive. And so there's not like something you just use as a service. And so it's sort of like, well, we kind of, if we want to fix that hole in a way that's different than what we've done, we probably just do have to build it ourselves. And think the biggest struggle there, the bigger struggle than building it, because there's a lot of like reasonably straightforward ways to build it, to do at least what we need to do. The struggle there is like, what will the ongoing infrastructural costs be?
Yeah.
What will the ongoing costs of maintaining that infrastructure, because that requires a person to be able to handle emergencies, be? And I don't think we can make some guesses, but I feel like at this point they're still kind of wild guesses, because we don't really have a really good picture of how big a given site or the different sites that we monitor are, and how much they change.
Yeah.
And so like, if we store the data smartly, we can do it in a relatively compressed way. So if the site only changes by 5%, we only store 5% more the next time we like snapshot everything. But we don't know on average, like, does EPA change every, if we snapshot every 3 days, like, is it changing about 5% every 3 days, or is it changing like 80% every 3 days? And that drastically changes what our sort of like storage costs look like. And that the reason like the data we have right now doesn't answer that very cogently is partially because it's a relatively biased sample of pages, but also partially because we're focused on the pages and not on the entirety of the content. So if we were actually crawling and scraping everything and making our own archive that we made public, that would involve like all the sub resources of a page. So like the scripts and style and layout stuff, or the images and the video files, and those tend to change less frequently than the page content, I think. And so we don't have a good handle on like how much of that there is and the frequency of change that stuff undergoes.
Whatever happened to Page Freezer? They seem to have like...
So Page Freezer is a better model of the sort of thing we want to do. They were extraordinarily expensive to run, and we had little to no control over it, and making changes was supremely painful. So the way it was set up to run and store data was a very expensive way. The way they wanted to do it was where they didn't just build and provide the software, they totally maintained the servers for us. So anytime that we needed to make a change about how they were arranged or anything else, like it was an account we owned, but we had to sort of like go through them to administer the servers to make changes. And so it was this very long loop and a hard loop to travel, because there's a big like context break between us and them, right? Because they're doing all their normal business daily operations, and then we come in with some like, oh, we need this to happen, and they're like, wait, why do you need that? You have to re-explain everything to somebody who's like not totally read in on the situation. And so like traveling that loop is both painful and slow, and then like things that require the software to behave differently are even harder. And then the last part was we never got a way to reliably like extract data from the archives they store, because they store their archive data in a proprietary format, and then they provided an API to get data out of it in that format. But their whole thing seems to be structured to operate more like Versionista. So when what they were doing for us was snapshotting the entirety, crawling and snapshotting the entirety of a reasonably large site like EPA, that archive was so large that when we tried to use their API to extract stuff, it would just crash. So we actually couldn't get the data out. It was like in a box that you can't open. Like opening the box causes the box to explode. Like that was the situation we were in with Page Freezer. And it was just sort of like all of those things combined we're just sort of like, we have a flow that's at least working for us in Versionista, and this is so painful and so not actually working at the end of the day that it's such a distraction that it's like we need to just take what we have, put it in a box, and say, turn this off for now, and not figure out how to address the $5,000 a month bill that this thing causes when it's actually not delivering anything that we can use. And the pain of trying to solve how to get it to deliver something we can use seems really high.
Yeah. Ooh, okay. That's it. I just really like dropped, it was like the next big thing, and then like all conversation about it stopped.
Yeah, it's like, it's really great that we have like PageFreezer and Internet Archive as organizations that have been like, oh, we like what you're doing and we want to support you and we'll give you all of these things for free. But the problem is like when those things don't actually quite match up with what we need or don't work for our situation. And it's like, you want to be like, thank you, this is so wonderful. But when it doesn't actually work, you're in this tough situation where you want to be like, thank you for the help, but also like, this doesn't solve our problem, so we can't really use it. Or like the way you're giving it to us just costs us money. And like it's all cost and like this much benefit. It's like everybody's in this situation with the best of intentions, but the end results is like we don't quite match up enough for it to actually work. And so this collaboration is a cost for everybody rather than a gain for everybody. It's so frustrating to have that, right? Because everybody's like, oh, we want to help each other.
Totally.
But then trying to help each other just costs everybody.
Yeah. Did Mark ever respond to your question about whether or not he, like, the part about like, we thought because it was kind of like a give and take here with like feedback and code and stuff, but do you feel like we should be paying? Did he ever respond to that?
No, he never responded. I guess I should poke him again on that discussion channel. But no, he never responded. Yeah, I don't know. The frustrating thing was that, instead of after that, instead of responding, he went and asked the same things to somebody else on a private DM.
Oh, that was before that was when he went and talked to Brendan. Mm-hmm. Oh, right. Okay. Yeah.
The next week after he was like, I'll have to read this over the weekend and get back to you. The next week after the weekend, instead of getting back to us, he just started the same conversation with somebody else. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, bummer. I do think it sounds like you've really, like, obviously put a lot of thought into this, and that it is still the best primary source of data for us for now.
Internet Archive?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, I think I worry a lot about the frequency with which it breaks.
Yeah.
That's actually of all the things that are good or bad or frustrating or not about it, the one that worries me the most right now, that I think about the most right now, is the frequency with which there are, like, we can't extract data problems. And then, like, the upshot is, like, they're still pretty reliable about saving things. It's just that once the system is up and working again, we have to run a like 10 times larger query that's more impactful on us and on them, to like go back and pull in the stuff that is now available that we couldn't get at during the time that like extracting the information was broken.
Yeah. It seems like maybe monthly things go awry.
It feels like it's about at that pace, like once a month-ish. Because I feel like every other one of these meetings, I'm like, oh, Archive just had a week of pain.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes me wonder if there's some sort of like, granted, I know nothing about these processes, but at the root of it, like, is this like lining up with their like monthly bill cycle for things, and like they just like reach capacity and that breaks everything?
I don't know. Like that's a really good question. Like It could be. It could totally be something like that.
Okay. Um, well, as far as open road goes, I still think that going for it, and if we could get this money and devote that to walk, that could also free up, your time to work on the web monitoring things that aren't walk that just all that ongoing. And I think that, yeah, I think it's still worth going for.
Okay. Yeah.
If they would fund there's a roadblock here, and this is addressing a key part of that roadblock, not the whole roadblock. But
yeah. I mean, I think at this point we have to break things down into smaller problems anyway. So like being able to say here's a key part, something we have to be able to do anyhow, which I think we can do now, right? We can say mapping is a thing, the archiving, crawling and archiving on our own is a thing, and the other stuff around like the database and around automated analysis. So there are several things that are very identifiable, but those are less new, acute, singular problems.
Although we also, as far as the mapping and as far as the mapping goes, part of the information of how crucial it is new in terms of like, in terms of like the necessary shift in our work toward that we always knew was coming, but like has now come, of like needing to kind of synthesize, like analyze the landscape of change, which we can't do without that. And just like kind of recognizing that like as as Trump wasn't impeached immediately because he's ridiculous, like, and we now just see that like things will be destroyed and we will have to rebuild after this era. We're in a place of needing to be able to do these kind of broader analyses.
There's another, this is off the track of what we sort of proposed in our proposal to Open Road. Have you been tracking the discussion on archiving about capturing data from the Deer Park spill or whatever so I popped in on that last night, just like coming back around to it because I hadn't kept track since probably a week ago, or not quite a week ago. And one of the things is that I think there's a new source of data that had come up from Gene, whoever the person on the other side that we were talking to was, that Brendan hadn't seen, that should be more capturable by query. But then the other problem was that like the main sources of data we were all looking at and that they were looking at, and the stuff that is specific new data gathering that is a response to the emergency, is all PDFs. And in particular, it's PDFs in a format that just doesn't include, like even if you could parse it in some machine readable way, like the parts that are machine readable just doesn't include all the information. Some of it is encoded in a picture and you just can't, like, even if you're really smart, the information fidelity in that photo is low. So there's like a map with a bunch of dots and only some of the dots show up in the table, and the table that's next to the map doesn't actually have the location of those dots. So you'd have to like infer them from the map. But then you don't even have the matching additional data to go with the other dots, because the data part only includes the dots where there was detection. that was
Uh-huh.
high enough to meet a threshold, and doesn't include the ones where there's not. But if you want to reproduce an important part of the display, which is here are the edges, you have to go where there's not. And so those PDFs are from a you want to do anything with this data other than like look at a map at a community meeting and say something vaguely useful about it. Like those PDFs are totally unhelpful. But they're still like they're useful for humans at a small scale. They're just you can't do any analysis or anything computational from it. So there's this doesn't pertain to OpenRoad, but like I thought it pertained interestingly to the things we were saying about like what can we do as far as like proactive recommendations. Like, oh, how do you present information in an emergency like this? Like there's some super useful things to be said as a critique of like how this stuff is made available. And then, but the other part of it that more pertains to OpenRoad is Brendan's response to it was kind of like, oh, all the important data is in PDFs, and the way they're formatted is hard to extract data from, so that's not going to be a good fit for query and for what we're trying to do in archiving, because it's not really like a data set. So it's a better fit for what Internet Archive does. And so I poked my head in and said, okay, cool. It sounds like we haven't, but just to make sure, like, has anybody gone any farther than that and like actually connected Gene with somebody at Wayback to say like, hey, you two should talk about how to do this better. And in the super short term, have we alleviated pain by making sure that these pages in the PDFs that exist so far are in Wayback? And then I realized I should just go ahead and do that. So I went ahead and did that and realized that the tooling we have fulfilled like half the problem. There was a little bit of a manual piece I had to do to set it up, and then I could just like throw it to the same set of tools we have that run every other day to poke Save Page Now to like save some of our pages that we're monitoring. And so there was an interesting like, what could we do with some money and somebody's time to extend that tool slightly for a situation like this, where you're like, oh, there's a page that is thematic, and you specifically want to make sure that Wayback captures that page and this set of links from that page. Like this page is a list of PDF files. I want to capture this index page, and I want to capture all the PDF files that were linked, but not like all the other, I don't want to like start crawling from this page. I just want like this stuff. And just say like, do that and have it go off and like shove those into Wayback. Or really go off and tell Wayback to save all those particular things, which is like a very small scale, doable, maybe super useful thing that I hadn't thought about, except seeing this, right? Where this is like different than our general monitoring stuff where we have a list of things, and it's different than like crawling and archiving a whole site. It's like a very thematic mini crawl that you could sort of automate a lot of tooling for and make it close to possible for somebody non-expert to run, or make it take 5 or 10 minutes of time for someone like us to run, and therefore like make us more able to respond to this kind of situation where we can just be like, oh, this fits that pattern, let me just queue it up, and then we're good.
I think that could be super useful. Also because things like I was noticing that like a bunch of node pages in EPA are now 404s, and like you don't know what that page was because it's like epa.gov/node/ like 8 numbers. And I think in past experience, a lot of them I thought were PDFs. And some of the PDFs are like /site/production, whatever, but a lot of them were nodes too. But now we just don't know. And so like that sort of thing could be also really useful to like, have a a log of that.
Yeah. That's actually really interesting. Like that's another very scopable thing where there's like a twofold bit to that. One is the part we already know and have some work queued up to do whenever me or some human has time, which is to fix the part of the system that sort of hard links our concept of a page to a URL. Because we know some of the things like what you're talking about, I don't know if these ones in particular, go through a period where they do the right thing, where the new URL the thing lives at exists and gets redirected to by the old URL. But as long as we're sort of like unable to capture that happening, we just keep looking at the old URL. And at the point in time where they finally say, our transitionary period of 3 months or 6 months or a year has ended, we're turning off the old ones, then we just go dark. Whereas we could have really easily picked up that there was a transition happening and sort of said, cool, the old URL is this, the new URL is this, and everything continues to operate fine. Like like the reason when you're looking at our URLs that they're not like, monitoring.envirodata.gov.org / like the URL you care about, and they're like a giant nutty sequence of numbers, is we made that choice so that we could do this, but then we never got around to doing this. Right, so we could say a page is different than its URL. It can live at many URLs over time. So pages have this random set of numbers that identify them, basically.
That was really smart with a lot of foresight.
They would fail to follow it up. But yeah, that was a super intentional decision, and a lot of good advice from Dan about figuring out the best way to do that.
And also another like kind of categorical issue with Internet Archive, because they do have the like.
Yeah. And we can go back. So that was the two-part thing, right? Like one is fixing the software so that as this happens in the future, we just automatically handle it. But the other is we can totally go back in between our snapshots in the Internet Archive data. We can identify a lot of these where that's happened and automatically fix them. So like that is a thing we could do. I've been doing that halfway. I've been logging them on the small scale, because what happens for us, we set up that ridiculous health check script, which are you familiar with, like what it does?
At the like kind of handwriting level.
So like it goes and it takes a random sample of like 10 pages from our database, and then it goes and looks for the URLs for those pages in Wayback and says like, have they been snapshotted in Wayback anytime in the last 3 days? And then it just sends an email if the answer was less than all of them, that just says like, here's the samples we checked, and here are the ones that are there and the ones that aren't. And what I have started doing for the past 3 months is every day or every 3 or 4 days, I look at the set of emails that we've gotten on each day, and for all the ones that failed, I go like look at what is actually going on with them. So this is like what's fueling every time I poke in with them, like, hey, we have a lot of pages that look like this that I bet we don't want to monitor. It's because one of those failed, and I went to look at it, and I was like, I'm not sure we should even care about this. But then ones will fail where it'll be like, oh, it's totally a 404 now. But if I spelunk backwards in time a little bit in Wayback to the point in time at which it was not delivering a 404, and look at the title of that page and then search like NOAA or EPA or whatever for that page title, and the search finds it and it's just at a new URL, and then I can be like, cool, old URL was this, new URL was this. We have no way to like plug that into the database yet, but we have it in this list. But that's at a super small scale compared to the scale of that problem, right? The ones that I have like manually.
But still, that's cool, and it's cool to know that like really does happen frequently enough that you have been manually building a database for it.
Yeah, so like you can see some of that. Let me just grab a link here for you. Missing from IA.
I still really need to like look through the 40,000 URLs into some. Every time you're like, hey, do we want to be monitoring this? I'm like, oh, right, I need to look through them. That's just like a big, a big to do.
Yeah. So like this link. So this file is the one that every other day we go through and we hit save page now and Wayback until it's saved all the URLs in this file. But the ones I highlighted are like this first section, moved pages, is ones that I've looked at, and they're still redirecting to the right place. So everything is like okay. But probably they'll eventually fail in the way you're seeing with these like node pages where they'll stop redirecting. And then the ones after that are like moved and broken pages are the ones like what you're talking about where they've been moved and the redirect is no longer valid. And I had to like go dig around and find out where they are. So I don't know. But so you have a sense of like where this information lives and like
totally
that kind of stuff. Yeah. And there's an even bigger list of like 3,000 or 5,000 pages that I have on my hard drive. I went and did a check one day and just instead of doing a random sample of 10, I ran that same process against every page in the database. And so there's like 3,000 or 5,000 pages that it looks like Wayback is not automatically snapshotting that are in our database and our tag is active. And 80% of the ones that fail our health check in Internet Archive are on that list. So I take them off that list and I put them in this file when they fail health check and I investigate them. Sometimes the health check failure is a page that when I search for it in that bigger list, I see a whole bunch of similar pages or pages in a similar domain. And so I'll just like move all of those over. So,
yeah.
Like piecemeal way I'm working through it. I'm worried about taking that whole file and just dumping it in here because the way we use Save Page Now seems like it's pretty high impact. Like it takes an hour to automate Save Page Now to do all these. And if we multiply the size of this file times 10 or times 5, like I worry about the feasibility of that. And I think the right answer to that is Save Page Now 2, the beta version of Save Page Now, which works in a really different way, but like I have to write some code that's better than the really bad prototype code I wrote to use it in a similar way to the way we're using the current one.
Save Page Now 2 also offers the sort of crawling feature, right?
Yeah, I think what it does when you tell it to do that is it goes one level out. So it's crawling, but it's not really like crawling. It's not like you're not telling it to sort of like spider out from this place. You're sort of saying like, oh, any links on this page also capture that target, but I don't think it's starting a like spidering crawl where it just keeps going.
Yeah. I feel like that could be challenging and useful, like to deal with that, and then like account for all the like duplicates that would, and what kind of like data impact that would have.
Yeah, and this is totally in that space of where like every so often I talk about it's good to work with Internet Archive, but there's also a little bit of impedance mismatch because they can't always just do what would make sense for us because they have a user base that they're serving that has like a much wider variety of needs and other things and scale that they have to solve for, where it's like, oh, if we could just say like, oh, we need to do these things, can we design a version of Save Page Now that like does that well for us? Like it would be great. Like we could work around all those questions or problems, but because their mission and our mission are slightly different, like we can use Save Page Now in this way, but the way that we use it causes all those questions, right? Like, like if we just turn that on and then do this against all these pages, will that cause a lot of redundancy problems? And that then becomes hard to solve instead of easy to solve because we're separate organizations with slightly separate users and slightly separate needs and goals.
Yeah.
Or like we can tell them about that, but how they prioritize that or fit that in or figure out how to do that in a way that works for us and isn't like an extra barrier step for other people, then becomes a problem they have to work out.
Yeah, I kind of wish I knew what their other like primary users are and like what the goals of those organizations are, and like, you know, if there would be like ways to streamline like, you know, all of our needs. But I feel like that's not going to happen. But
it's also one of those things where you're like, I don't know the point at which I have to sort of like stop and say, it can't be on us to answer.
Right. Yeah.
Like we just don't have the capacity to try and ask that question.
That's true. That's true.
But it's a question they should be asking or solving. Maybe they have a good handle on that. Maybe they don't. I don't know.
I mean, that might be like a large part of what Mark's job is to do.
Yeah.
Did they ever? What's the status on the forking question? Or not question?
Of the software. I don't know. I have not checked back in on that since we had that whole discussion. And since Vangelis showed up on Slack and said, "Oh yeah, we'll fix that."
Mm-hmm.
Checked in to see whether they have.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, I haven't either. But I was glad to see Vangelis show up, and I do think that he'll address it. I would, you know.
Yeah. I mean, I'm totally with Dan in that. I think it was more an unintentional omission or failure rather than an intentional one.
Hey, look who's super late.
I was just saying that I agreed with you in the analysis of the forking and licensing issues was more of a like surprisingly open source 101 mistake, but also more of a mistake than a willful anything.
Have you noticed, Dan, if they address that?
So it unsuccessfully tried to.
Oh no!
They like added. We were already linked, but not as directly as you would want. Like it wasn't as clear what the provenance of the code was as you would want. But they did link to us. They just expanded the text around that, but they didn't actually add the license, and that's the key thing. Last I checked, there were that was about a week ago, but there were a bunch of commits. It would be easy to quickly check again. So I don't know. I guess at some point we could poke them again and say, "You really need to add a license."
Yeah, that'd probably be. We should make sure we do that.
Yep, still no license.
So surprising.
Yeah. And also, why is Mark not following up on that? Because he seemed to really care about the license, and he at least should know. But anyway.
Yeah.
Here we are.
So I think I don't know if we have more to go through. I think that the main thing that we spent a lot of time talking about was just any concerns or questions or thoughts about how we should try and characterize our current needs and direction to Open Road. Because I'm meeting with Phil this afternoon to plan for that call, and then we're going to have a call with them on Thursday, tomorrow.
Okay.
And the main change is Open Road funds, like if you have a major road block, like an emergency road block, and they're like opening the road by pouring money into it. And the and so the roadblock that we identified was using Internet Archive as our primary data source, and the proposal was to use Walk instead. But now the scope change, like kind of narrowing the scope of Walk to be more focused on site mapping, so that we can kind of have an understanding of how representative our sample is, like what else we would need to do to be order to kind of characterize the the whole site, but not actually become a different data source than Internet Archive.
I like that. And I like the characterization that I've seen pop up in a couple places of Walk as a sandbox, a place for us to understand what we need. And the outcome of that is not necessarily a long-maintained project. It could just be a series of requests to the Internet Archive, or a series of ideas of how to integrate with the Internet Archive or other tools better for our needs.
Yeah. Or even the experimentation needed to develop a clear scope for the tool we actually needed or something.
Right.
Yeah. I think the other thing that came up, just to fill you in on it, Dan, is I don't know if you've been tracking in archiving the discussion about, I think somebody from Sierra Club, who's local in Houston, I'm not sure, was concerned about all the emergency response monitoring data of the benzene spill, I think, or benzene release. I guess it's not really a spill since it's atmospheric mainly, in Houston, and the concern that like that data might go away or be lost, and Brendan had looked into it really briefly because we thought, oh, this is like a perfect use case for like really starting to do things with a query. And it turns out that it's all, or 90% of it, all of it at the time that Brendan looked, is in PDFs. And it's also in PDFs where we can't even really extract all the data because there's some tabular stuff in the PDF, but it's missing key data that's only encoded in a picture that is next to the table. And the picture is not at a resolution where we would be able to like meaningfully extract all the information. So like that you just can't, like even if you were magical, you couldn't extract all the data that you need to create a coherent picture from that PDF. And so there's like a useful thing to say in terms of like, hey, what can we provide about critique for how the government could better provide data around this stuff in this kind of situation? But B, the thing that turned up out of that was Brendan was sort of like, yeah, based on the character of this, maybe it's a better job for Internet Archive. And I went through last night and figured it was a good thing just to make sure for short term, all that stuff got saved via Save Page Now in Internet Archive. And I realized like there's room for possibly this might be a really useful, small, medium-sized scope project of like just an independent tool. Because what I wound up doing was I said, oh, okay, so we have this page that links a whole bunch of PDFs. And what you really want to do is say, save that page and save the PDFs, these particular PDFs that are the data files we care about that are linked from that page. You don't want to like crawl the whole thing, because you crawl from there, then you get all of like the Texas State Environmental Agency or like all of the EPA, which should not be your goal. And so what I wound up doing was I took that page and then I just like popped open the console and ran a CSS selector and like one line of JavaScript to build myself a list of URLs for all of the documents linked from it. And then just pump those into the exact same tool that we're using to hit Save Page Now every other day. And
cool.
That did the job. And I was like, oh, how do you like plug those things together into a tool where ideally somebody like this person in Houston could just use it, or like slightly less ideally, but still super useful, somebody like us could do this job in 5 minutes. As opposed to like, we gotta go investigate and maybe point you over here and we're not quite sure what we're doing. Like
Yeah.
we just be like, cool, it fits this pattern. We have a tool for this. We can just say, like go to this page and identify the links like this and tell the tool to do that. And then you have an automated way to keep saving it as that page gets updated with new PDFs and et cetera.
Yeah, I like that. I'm like in idle moments thinking in the back of my mind about the modularity of Walk and what our interfaces actually are, what our reusable pieces are.
Yeah.
Because that's related to this, right?
I mean, I think there's a really clear path on this that is totally separate.
Well, it's fully separate from like the site mapping thing that I guess Walk is now.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of like, maybe the pieces of Walk could also be repurposed in this way.
Yeah. That was my impression, but I get where you're trying to make the point that this is a really well scoped thing that we can just do.
Yeah.
You shouldn't get tangled up in big picture stuff.
Yeah. I mean, it'd be like yet another like other scope for a thing that sort of fits thematically with what Walk is doing that you could do with Walk. But like, where's the point at which you say yes and no to those? And like, how do you find the time to do that? Because if we do it there, then there's a whole lot to go from scratch versus if we do it with the tools we have.
Right.
And there's not.
Yes. Cool.
Anyway.
Also, way to do something useful. Rescuing data.
very, very small.
So,
but yeah. So maybe that's another, like, if whether or not like we find some way to have funding to pay for that, like that's super well scoped, and like I'll bet somebody might be jazzed to like help do exactly that.
Yeah.
Like if you know folks who might be interested, like that might be a good medium-sized like project that somebody could really bite into.
Yeah.
That doesn't need as much of all the other stuff that we have.
Yeah, that makes sense. Oh, on the subject of roping in new people, I gave the link to Web Monitoring DB to a friend of mine who's a professional Rails dev. So if somebody shows up offering code review for Rails, it's possible I send him. Sweet. Yeah. Thank you. I don't know if it'll happen or not, but it seems possible. So.
Okay. It's 10 o'clock, and I think I need to have some time to work on other things.
Thanks for catching me up. Sorry for jumping into the end here.
No, that's cool. Any last minute like stuff we should make sure we cover? Good. Cool.
Awesome.
See y'all later.
Cool.
Good to see you.
Thanks, Al. See ya.
Take care.